I'm Stephanie Cole and I'm obsessed with One Day at a Time on Netflix. Please watch it so it gets renewed.
I'm Monique Hammond and I'm obsessed with VR documentaries. They don't need to get renewed, so you don't need to watch them, but you can if you want.
This is the Modern Adults podcast where we explore the modern adult landscape and ask all the dumb questions about adulthood so you don't have to. We really have no dignity.
Coming up in this episode, we're talking about how to get a job. What should you wear, bring, do, say? Should you bring baked goods? How do you land your dream job when you're not exactly qualified?
So how does one get a job? How do you stand out? How do you put yourself in a position where you're the only person fit for the job? It's not as obvious as it seems, but it makes a whole lot of sense. So I'm weirdly obsessed with this topic. I will listen to podcast after podcast. I even have a job, and I like my job, but I'm just fascinated with the process. Like, I think just the psychology behind maybe the other side as well, and how you can be the right person for the job, and how do you make yourself the right person when you have no idea what the other person is looking for. So what can you do as yourself, and what can you do to make yourself look amazing and the right person, and that you would fit into the culture of the workplace? Like, what can you do?
So I think this is a hard topic because there's so much advice about job seeking and how to write the perfect resume and the perfect cover letter, and
throwback to the failure resume episode.
Throwback to the failure resume episode. And I think there's a lot of good advice out there and there's a lot of bad advice. And I think you need to take all advice for job searching with a bit of a grain of salt, because I don't think there's one way to job search and get a job. Like, you might do everything a certain blog recommends and never get a job because the hiring manager happens to hate a certain thing that blog recommends. Like, there's no one way to do it. There's just, I guess, best practices.
Right.
And
I mean, if you're not the right person for the job, then you're not the right person for the job.
And you don't want a job that you're not a good fit for. Like, I would be miserable working in a healthcare setting, but I've applied for those jobs and I'm so glad I didn't get them.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, my process of getting a job, I know we've spoken about this before and I'm going to bring it up again. No. Straight out of uni, I was very fortunate to get a full-time job in a workplace that I really, really love and I enjoy. I really enjoy coming to work every day and getting to do what I do. So I'm very fortunate in this position, to be in this position. The process for me was interesting. I am someone who's very all or nothing. And
I think this is terrible advice for job seeking.
Oh, yeah.
Just gonna say.
But not really, because the way I approached it is okay, I really, really want this job, so I'm going to give it everything that I have. But
I think that's not good advice, Steph. I'm so sorry.
Why though?
No, because I think the best advice I've ever been given for job seeking, or I've ever read for job seeking, is that you apply to a job and then you forget about it. Because once you've applied for a job, there's nothing you can do to make yourself better. You're done. So you should apply for a job and then that's it. You're done. Your resume is off. You should never think about it again. And if they call you, that's great. And if they never call you, that's just the way it is. Because I think realistically, when you're at the beginning of your career, you're going to get rejected so much more often than you're going to get your job. And I think you're very lucky. And I think you think your approach works because you were lucky. But I think that's the exception rather than the norm.
No, but what I'm saying is that when you're writing your cover letter, when you're, filming a video interview for them, you need to be able to immerse yourself completely into the company that you're applying for. Because otherwise, how are you going to fit in?
Yeah. And I think you should fit in with the company you're applying for, and you should in your cover letter. And if by God forbid you have to do a video interview, fuck that. If you have to do that, you should really know what you're talking about. You should know the company. And when I interviewed for my job and I was writing my cover letter, I did so much research into that company, but I didn't like live and breathe it. I just did it for that cover letter. And if I hadn't got that job, like that's fine.
So the way and the way I'm looking at it is that the values were really important for me with the company. So when I say I really fully immersed myself in it, I went through everything to make sure I'm not wasting my time with this company. I want to make sure that they believe in what I believe in and that the work I do there is going to be meaningful, and not just for them, but for myself as well. Because otherwise, what's the point of getting up every day and going to a job that you hate?
I think you should definitely consider that. And but I don't think you can know that just by applying for a job. Like you can only know that when you've interviewed for the job and when you've asked questions around like, what's the company like, you know? Like, I mean, I didn't ask many questions in my interview for the job I eventually got because they were very upfront. They're like, this is the culture. Like, sometimes you have to work overtime, but here's how we deal with that. Like, and they answered those questions, but that's something I would have never have known from like their website because it's not, that's like what they say their culture is, and what they say their culture is on their website is not the same as what they say their culture is in interviews, and it's not the same as what the culture actually is, you know? So I don't think you can know that.
I suppose there's a different culture for like what the business is as like an entity and what other people see of it, because it is a product or a service that you want someone to buy. So obviously there's going to be a different front to what the back end looks like. And I think maybe, that's where there is a little bit of confusion, but I think a company that is set up right will have some of that like mix. And I think for me, it's just very important that I do all of that, because then I have no regrets about it. Because I don't want to feel like I missed out on something because I didn't give it an extra 2 hours of my time.
See, I agree. I think you should really immerse yourself in the company for the purposes of getting the job. But I don't think focusing on just one job and like pinning all your hopes and dreams on that is a good way to job seek. I think it's a good way for you to fail and then get disheartened and then not get jobs. I think for job hunting, I think you've got to send out a lot of resumes, and like job listings aren't up forever. So you've got to do it quickly and you've got to do it accurately. So you can spend a day researching the company and a day writing your cover letter and then a day leaving it and then a day editing it and sending it to people and proofreading it. And then you've got to apply, and that's 4 days later, because if you don't apply in 4 days, heaps of other people will have applied, and then you don't know how they're sorting resumes. You don't know if after 10 days they would have gotten 800 resumes. So
but what if it's your dream job? Because
there's no such thing as a dream job. I firmly believe there is no such thing as a dream job, and people who like put themselves up to only work in their dream job are people who are setting themselves up for failure.
Okay, that aside, I want to talk about it in a sense where you really, really want this job. Okay,
I think you shouldn't.
I know that's what you think, but what if it's a job that you really, really want and it would make you happy?
Look, I would be realistic in that you're probably not going to get it, because if it's a dream job, so like the job that I have is a dream job for me and I worked really hard to get it, but if I hadn't got it, I wouldn't be like that crushed, because that's just how life is. Jobs are hard to get. Dream jobs are the hardest jobs to get. And it's your dream job. It's also probably a bunch of people's dream job. And they might be differently qualified to you. That's what they happen to be looking for, you know?
Okay.
I just don't think pinning your hopes and dreams on one job, even if it is the perfect job for you, you actually can't know that.
Yeah, so I agree with that to an extent. And I think it definitely comes down to what you're looking for. And that doesn't necessarily have to be with a particular company, but if you're able to work out like what would make you happy day in, day out, what would you not mind doing every single day and getting paid for? And if you can work that stuff out, then you can work out, okay, so these jobs would be right for me and I'm going to ignore the rest. I
know. Like, I just think ignoring other jobs in favor, if you've got, say there's 5 job openings and they all close on the same day, and one is your dream job and you've only got 4 days to do all 5 jobs, I would say put in for all 5 jobs.
Yeah.
Don't ever ignore a job that you might like and might be good at. I'm not saying like apply for jobs that are completely out of what you want to do. Never do that. But like, if there's your dream job and then there's 4 other jobs that are like, oh, I could do this and I would be good at that and I might enjoy working there, you should apply for all of them. You should not neglect the other ones for your dream job, because you just might not get it. And then you've wasted 4 other opportunities. And I think that's a mistake. And I think if you don't ever work at jobs that aren't your dream job, but that will get you closer to it, then you're never going to get your dream job, because you don't have the skills, you don't have the experience. Like, I worked in IT for ages. I'm terrible at IT. Like, that's not anything to do with my dream job, but working in IT helped me get the job that I have now, which is a really, really great job. Because now they were like, oh, what are your computer skills like? We're transitioning this database. And I was like, fuck yeah, I'm all over that. I do IT stuff. So I don't know. I think you've just got to think about the practicalities rather than just like, this is my dream and I'm going to give it 100%. Give it 100%, but don't neglect the rest of your life for it.
Okay, so now you know what both of us feel about getting a job.
Strong opinions on that.
Very different opinions, but I want to kind of get into some advice on if you are searching for a job. I know this might be conflicting advice and I'm very sorry. Just pick a side and then take that advice.
I think just before we go into it, I think there's lots of advice about job seeking, and you've got to pick the advice that works for you, and you've got to know your industry and you've got to know yourself. And like, maybe for your industry and for you as a personal person, a failure resume is like a great thing to do. But if you're like going for a lawyer, like a lawyer job, like don't do that. Like, you have no knowledge of your industry if you're doing that. So every piece of advice you've got to take with a grain of salt and apply it to you as a person and your industry as a whole. So this is our advice from a creative industry, which will probably not be suitable for like doctors. And hopefully doctors are getting their advice from other doctors.
Right. So I think my advice and my personal approach, and I know Monique doesn't necessarily agree with it, but I'm going to share anyway. I am someone with a lot of anxiety about everything. And the way I calm myself down especially is to just over prepare. And so I think maybe that's where I'm coming from and maybe where we're a little bit different in that sense. But the way I prepare for any kind of job or job interview or any kind of interview in general is to just over prepare. No, like I'll get people to ask me questions. I'll do like mock interviews with people.
Mock interviews are great.
Yeah.
Always do mock interviews.
And get someone who you're not necessarily like that close with either. Like I would get people who I don't have like conversations with all the time. Like at my old workplace, I'd be like, hey, can you just ask me these questions? Like, and then I would get someone who's close to me and then I would tell them to like go really hard on me and do really like blunt answers to me.
Yeah.
And that's how I would prepare. But I think with your cover letter and your resume, don't lie with it either. Put on what your experience is. And I think if you feel like you don't have enough experience, you can be open with that. You can tell someone in an interview, look, I haven't got this experience, but I know how to do this. And I think with a little more time, I will be able to transfer those skills.
And I think that's a really big thing is like transferable skills. Like you might not have ever had cash handling experience in a formal setting, but you might have like impromptu ran something for a charity you work for. Yeah. Like you need to sort of be aware about how like you might not have proper experience, but you do have transferable skills. And if you can point to that and say, they told me to do this and I learned how to do it in one day, I'm sure I can apply that same dedication to this skill that you're looking for.
Yeah.
But don't say it like that, because that sounded a bit wishy-washy, but you know.
Yeah. And I received some really good advice the other day when I was going for an interview for the web series that I'm producing. And someone in the sales team at my workplace, he has conducted or been in multiple interviews. And the best question he asks every single time is, what's stopping you from giving me the job right now? And it basically turns it on them to look in themselves and be like, oh, okay, we're a bit hesitant about this. And then you can close your interview by addressing every one of their concerns. So when you walk out the door, they're like, oh, okay, I don't have any concerns about them. They were great.
I agree. I think that's, for me, when I started to interview, that was a part of the interview that I overlooked, is that I can ask the interviewer questions. Yeah. And you should ask lots of questions, like around the culture, the work hours, like the job responsibilities, what makes a successful person, because you're not, I think, you know, being younger and like before I was kind of like, I want this job, that's a given. But now I'm like, oh, no, I'm interviewing them equally as much as they're interviewing me. So that's like something to think about when you ask questions. But you should always ask, in my experience, like, is there anything else I can clarify, that anything else that I haven't covered that you're a bit concerned about, which is like the same as what your friend in sales said. Yeah. I just maybe wouldn't say it that aggressively.
Oh, no.
But like, work out what questions you want to ask, write them down, and like, it's fine to go, like, I mean, don't whip out a list and be like, I have these questions about your company, answer them now. But like, you can write them down and say things in the interview, because you're equally interviewing them as they are with you.
Yeah. And I think the better interviews are always ones that turn into a conversation.
Yes.
As soon as it's like they ask a question, you answer, and then they go to question, it's not a flowing conversation.
No.
It's not a good interview, I think, from what I've read and what I've heard speaking to like managers and whatnot. They're looking for people who they can get along with, because they have to work with you.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, it goes both ways. Maybe if it's not flowing, then you're just not the right fit, and you'll go to another job interview in a week and you will have that flow and conversation. So don't get disheartened when it's just not working in the interview. If it's not right, it's not right, and you will find something better.
Yeah. I think my advice for interviews and like getting a job that I would like to preface with, like, we're not experts at getting jobs and this is just our experience, but for like your resume, I've been reading the Ask a Manager blog and listening to her podcast, and the number one thing she says that stops people from getting jobs is that your cover letter and resume are not as good as you think they are. And that's just, especially like when you're in your 20s, that's just inexperience, because you don't know what a good resume and a good cover letter look like, because you've never had to hire. And the advice for job seekers is changing now, because it's going to more of an online system. And, you know, like my dad's advice, if I was like, I need a job, his advice would still be to like go and knock on a bunch of doors. And like, you should do that, but you should, you know, there's an online hiring system now for a reason, and no one actually kind of wants you to knock on their door that much. So be like really critical with the application materials and show them to a lot of people in your industry. Like, I know when I was applying for jobs, I sent it to like my tutors, because they have actually worked in the industry, and like any, you know, mentors or peers, because they have actually seen like good resumes and bad resumes, and they have a more critical eye than just your friend, you know? I mean, send it to your friend anyway, because they might pick up on things, but yeah.
And I think focus on things that you can control. So you can control the material that you're submitting. And if you can critically look at what you have to present or what your experience is, and you can tell that there's something missing or you don't have this training, then work it out and work out how you can fill those gaps. And whether that's you need to go into an interview and point blankly say, this is what I have a gap in my knowledge about, but I'm putting these measures in place to fix that.
And if you're finding the same gap every time, like everyone wants skill X and you just don't have it, you need to go and get it, or else, I mean, maybe you'll get a job without it, but if that's like a core part, then you need to volunteer to get that job, or you need to do an internship. And like, I hate unpaid internships. I think it's like a terrible culture shift, but it is good for getting you experience that you don't have the opportunity to get otherwise.
Yeah. And I think this is maybe a whole other conversation, but there's a level of entitlement I think people feel that you need to be careful about. If you've got missing experience and you know that you can't go into a job and expect it to be fine. You need to be proactive and you need to fill those gaps.
We'll probably do a segment about internships later because I know we both have strong opinions on them. One of the things that I did not know when I was like writing my resume and like getting advice of like my parents and stuff is like I would list what I did in each job. So I worked at Woolworths and I did cash handling and, you know, I bagged groceries, and it's like, oh, that's like everyone that works at Woolworths does that. That's not exciting. Like, what did you do when you worked there that someone else wouldn't have done? And it's like, oh, actually, like I was like the fastest and most accurate person. And like, I frequently got complimented on that. This was like back when I was in high school.
But you're still holding on to that.
I'm just using that as like a long ago experience, like for something that is really basic.
Yeah.
And also that I was like very trustworthy. And after 6 months, I like got promoted to like a different register where I had to do like more higher level things. And so I found when I listed those things, the things that I achieved in a job rather than the things that I did in a job, that makes a huge difference because it's like, what sets me apart? Like, what did I do in this job that made me a great employee and not a good employee? And if I was looking at two people who both did the same job, like what makes me better than them, you know?
Yeah.
So listing what you've achieved instead of the job description is a massive thing, I think. And again, Ask a Manager is the one who told me that. That's it for today's episode. You've been listening to Modern Adult. If you'd like to stay in contact or share your thoughts about the episode, head to our Facebook page, Modern Adult Podcast. If you like what you hear, please leave a review on iTunes and spread the word. If you're applying for a job and use our tips, we would love to know. Bye.